What is up, tacticians? Set 14 is just around the corner, and today I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the strongest comps you should expect to see. Now, this video is purely a summary as I go over what units to run and what items to put on your main carries. So if you want a deeper breakdown with specific openers and different play patterns, make sure you click that subscribe button and stay tuned for the next video. So today, I will be going over 3 standard, 3 reroll, and 3 vertical comps that I have tested on PvE and have found to be the strongest so far. So the first comp is Vanguard Marksman, and this is where you want to have 6 Vanguard frontline with Leona holding the tank items, and either J4 or Braum holding the utility items. Now, as you can see, Leona is holding Protector's Vow, Adaptive Helm, and Redemption. Now, you don't have to give all 3 of these to her, however, I do recommend at least the Protector's Vow. And this is because you want to build as much mana tank items on Leona as possible, so that she can cast her ability as soon as possible, and potentially even a second or third time. And this is because she actually stuns enemies, and as you know, stuns and other crowd control are very, very important as the game goes on. And next, we have Xayah, who is one of our backline carries, and she is an attack caster, so you do not want to be building Rageblade on her. Instead, you want to be building Shojin and IE. Now, Aphelios, you don't have to go double Rageblade on him, but it is one of his BIS item builds, and so you would generally go Rageblade and IE, or even Hextech Gunblade. Hextech Gunblade is pretty nice here as it heals your allies, and you know, you have 6 frontline, and that healing will be pretty nice. And so this is one way to play the comp. However, there is actually another way to play, and it's where you take 2 of your Vanguards off and put in 2 more Marksmen. So in this case, we put in a Jinx and a Jhin, and you would remove 2 Vanguards. You could really remove any here, but you just want to make sure you keep your Silas and Leona in. That way you can proc Anima Squad for Xayah. And so if we get rid of Rost and Skarner, we would have something like this, where we have 4 Vanguard and 4 Marksmen. So moving on to the second standard comp, we have Bastion Zeri. Now, Bastion Zeri is very, very similar to Vanguard Marksman. However, we will have Bastion frontline instead of the Vanguard, and our backline carry will consist of a tier 3 and a tier 4 rather than 2 tier 4s. And they will also be rapid fire instead of Marksman. Now, with this comp, it's like the other one, it's pretty straightforward. You just want to have your Bastions in the front line. You do not have to have all 7 Bastion, but I just kind of put all 7 out here to show you kind of an example of what the comp kind of looks like. And you just want to make sure you give your main tank items to Sejuani. And Sejuani is pretty similar to Leona, where she has a stun. So of course, Protector's Vow is very much recommended. And you don't generally have to itemize Renekton, but if you end up getting to level 9 and level 10, and you just have a level 2 Renekton, and you just happen to have items for him, this would kind of look like how you itemize him. And so if you can itemize them, then of course your team gets a lot stronger here, but not completely necessary. Your main focus is obviously itemizing Zeri, which is to give her Rageblade and an IE. Sometimes you give her double Rageblade or Rageblade and a Hextech Gunblade, but this is kind of how you generally build her. And of course you have Exotech active with Sejuani, Jax, and Zeri. And the Exotech items you get are different each round, and so different each game. So of course, if you get the tank Exotech items, you will give it to Sejuani, and then if you kind of get like a backline one, you will give it to Zeri. However, if you kind of get unlucky and Exotech 3 isn't like a really good Exotech item, then that'll be a little bit unfortunate. However, in most cases you should be fine. But yeah, this comp's pretty straightforward, kind of like the other one. Just go Bastion frontline, and you got your back 2 carries right here. So for a third and final standard comp, we have Strategist A.M.P. This is one of the comps I found to be very strong, despite Strategist having been nerfed a couple times. But you need to have a really good start for this comp. generally a decent econ augment, and that's because you're going to be doing a pretty fast 8 or fast 9, just so you can hit that level 2 Annie and potentially a level 2 Samira. But if you can hit level 2 Samira and level 2 Annie, this comp is pretty nice. You can generally get top 4 if you can hit these 2 units. And then you have Nico as your front line. In this comp, Garen is kind of optional. However, I just kind of put him in there because Garen giving mods in the late game is pretty nice. And you also don't have to go Strategist 5. But if you do want to, you can just put in that LeBlanc instead of the Garen, and so you can have Strategist 5, and or you get a Strategist emblem, something like that. But with this comp, if you don't want to go 5 amp and 5 strategist, there's actually a different way to play, and you can kind of go strategist flex. But generally with this, you can see there's a lot of bronze trade active, so if you get bronze for life 2, then this is a pretty nice comp you can go. And it's kind of where you have strategist 4, but you don't go all the way up to amp 5, instead you just keep it at amp 2. And this is kind of what it looks like. You still have your Nico 2 as your main tank, and then instead of the Annie, you'll have Ziggs as your main carry, just because you're proccing strategist and cyber boss, and just kind of a lot of trades for him. And so this is kind of what it would look like. So moving on to our reroll comps. First, we have the Executioner, Graves, and Vanguard Reroll. This comp looks pretty simple, however, it is a little bit harder to pull off unlike the other comps, mainly just because you are going to need a lot of items, because you need to fully itemize Vanguard, fully itemize Graves, and you want to try to get your utility items like Evan, Shroud, and Sunfire, and potentially even itemize Urgot and Vex in the backline, which isn't always realistic, but if you can, that would be pretty nice. And like I said, this comp is not so easy to pull off, so you generally want to be going this if you are uncontested and you start off with a lot of copies of Rengar and Graves. And one more thing to keep in mind, with Graves, you generally want to build him a QSS, just because of his passive, the fact that he will dash after every 2 attacks. QSS gives him that ramping attack speed, so it's pretty nice for him to attack 2 times as fast as possible. Like, it's not like you need to build up a Rage Blade important. However, you know, QSS kind of meets that middle of giving him just enough impactful attack speed every 2 seconds. So that's just something to keep in mind. So moving on to our next reroll comp, we have the infamous Shaco Reroll. Now this is probably the most popular reroll comp I've seen while playing on PvE. And essentially you just go for Shaco 3, make sure you don't level up. And Mundo 3 is completely optional, however if you can get him, he's a pretty nice tank who will also proc Slayer for Shaco. So for this comp, 2 things to keep in mind is you want to build Edge of Night on Zed and Shaco. So if you get the augment not today, obviously you want to be taking that, which is pretty nice. And on top of that, you are going to be going for Slayer 6 and Syndicate 3. Now you can go for Syndicate 5 and Slayer 4, which would kind of look something like this right here. So you kind of have that same kind of layout, except you take 2 of your Slayers out, and then make it Syndicate 5, and then you would itemize Misfortune. Now this one's possible as well, but like I said, Slayer 6 is a little bit better, has better stats, and generally is more recommended. So moving on to our final reroll comp, we have the Nitro Reroll. And this one's pretty popular as well, just like the Shaco Reroll. However, this one you're going to be focusing on rerolling for Shyvana, Nidalee, and Kindred. And not always, but in some cases you will also be 3-starring Elise. Now, there are a couple ways to play the Nitro comp. You could be going things like Nitro Cyber Boss Techie, Nitro Exotech, and Nitro Dynamo. But personally, I think The most popular route is the Nitro Exotech, and this is kind of what it looks like. You will mainly be going Shyvana as your main tank, and Nidalee as your frontline carry, and Kindred as your backline carry. But sometimes I've seen people not itemize Nidalee and instead itemize Elise, which is perfectly fine. But, you know, I just have a thing for A.M.P, so I like to itemize Nidalee, and she's even strong early on. Just make sure you are uncontested, and an econ augment would be preferable, but not necessary. But just make sure you're uncontested, and if you have one of the trade augments, perfect, but also not necessary. Moving on to our vertical comps. Vertical comps are more straightforward because you are generally going to be playing the same units every single time. And you know, and it's of the same trait, obviously. That's why it's a vertical comp. And so first we have our Anima Squad, which is probably one of the more popular vertical comps. And you will be mainly making Xayah and Aurora your carry, and Leona as your tank. And as we discussed earlier, you want to try to put Protector's Vow on Leona. And the comp would kind of look like this. You just have your 2 Vanguard, and you could just kind of add in a Renekton for Bastion, but you could also keep a Garen in. That way you can give Anima Squad mod, or like Dynamo mods to Xayah, or like Marksman mods to Aurora, something like that. You can kind of just play around with the different mods, which is kind of fun. And Jhin here is a pretty important unit because he will proc Marksman for Xayah and Dynamo for Aurora. So you kind of want to make sure you have Jhin in no matter what. For our second vertical comp, we have the Divinicorp. And this one you could say it's more of a flex comp because you could add in an Urgot, you could add in a Sejuani to proc Bastion and or Executioner. But you just want to make sure you have all 6 of your Divinicorps. And again, I like adding Garen in this comp just because you could be adding Divinicorp mods to like Sejuani or Urgot, which will give them a lot of stats. And in this comp, you will generally be going for Vex carry, which is why you kind of want to add an Urgot so you can proc Executioner, and then Urgot can be like a secondary carry. There's just a lot of ways to play this. And finally, last but not least, we have Street Demon. Street Demon is one of the less popular comps, and I would generally not recommend going this comp unless you start with the emblem. Now, the main reason being is because of the fact that you have units like Jinx and Mundo who are Bruiser Slayer and Marksman, and they're not really synergizing with the rest of the Street Demons, and so you don't want to keep these 2 units in, obviously, unless you're going for like Street Demon 10, for example. So like you kind of want to have that Street Demon emblem start so you can put it later on a person like a Garen, you know, to utilize his mods once again. And on top of that, Street Demon is a little bit harder to play just because, you know, people playing Strategist A.M.P are going to take your Samiras, they're going to take your, you know, they're going to take your Ziggs, Nico, your Echoes, and people playing like Techie or Vanguard Reroll are going to be taking your Brands, and people playing Executioner Reroll are going to be taking your Rengars. And so a lot of your units are going to be taken, and so it's just going to be overall harder for you to play, like I said, unless you start with the emblem, or you just start with like a, you know, a level 2 Echo. So there are just better lines to go with these specific units. Like I said, Street Demon does not really synergize very well within themselves. Like you have to bring in other units and other contested units by that. So this video was a quick summary of the top comps in set 14 that you should be expecting to see. Again, this was just a surface. I was very brief about the different comps, and I will try to do a more full breakdown and even show gameplay of each comp once the set goes to the live servers. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And yeah, until then, I will see you guys in the next video. Good luck on day 1, tacticians.